Hi everybody, so we are going to get started with the second half of the chapter 16 video. Hopefully it won't be as long as the first video, but let's get started. So we're going to move on to the thyroid gland. We left off talking about the anterior pituitary gland and the 6 hormones that are released from there. So let's pick back up where we left off. So we are starting with the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland that is located within our neck. And it's going to have follicles inside of it that are going to produce different types of cell products. The parafollicular cells, which are the main ones that I want you to focus on, are going to produce a hormone called calcitonin. Calcitonin affects the body because it's going to decrease blood calcium levels. So here we have a diagram showing us the location of the thyroid gland, excuse me, and how it is in relation to our trachea and its relation to where we would find it in the neck area. This is a diagram, a photomicrograph of the thyroid gland follicles, and these parafollicular cells are the ones that are going to release the hormones calcitonin, and they're the ones that, like I said, I'm more so focused on. The thyroid hormone that is going to be produced by the thyroid gland is the body's major metabolic hormone. So this is the second hormone that I want you to remember from the thyroid gland. It's found in 2 forms. So we have thyroxine and triiodothyronine, excuse me. So thyroxine, or T4, is a major form that consists of 2 molecules with 4 bonds. And then T3 is a form that has 2 tyrosines with 3 bonds, and must be converted to T4 at the tissue level. So they're basically 2 forms of thyroid hormone, and based on the formation of these 2 will determine how it will function when it gets to certain types of cells. Thyroid hormone affects virtually every cell in the body because it's going to affect the metabolism of those cells. And so every cell within our body is going to have metabolic functions. So each one of our cells are going to need the thyroid hormone to help to control those functions. So it enters the target cell, binds to receptors within the cell of the nucleus, and it's going to trigger transcription of various genes that we find on our DNA to make certain types of proteins. The effects of thyroid hormones include the increase of our basal metabolic rate and also the production of heat that occurs within our bodies. It's also going to regulate tissue growth and development. So think about the growth and development of tissues in the nervous system. Hey, yes, you can set it down. And it's also going to help to maintain our blood pressure by making sure that targeting the receptors on our blood vessels that will help the blood vessels dilate and contract when needed. I'm not going to go through or test you on the synthesis of the thyroid hormone, so I'm just going to breeze over this section. You can definitely read it for your understanding, but once again, I'm not going to test you on this information, so that's why I'm skipping over this section. All right. And we're going to continue to skip over it as well. Okay, so what happens if we have a hypersecretion of thyroid hormone in adults? This can lead to a condition called myxedema, which symptoms include low metabolism, thick and or dry skin, puffy eyes, feeling chilled, constipation, edema, mental sluggishness, and being lethargic. If this is due to us lacking iodine, we can actually have a goiter to develop. And this lack of this particular product from the body decreases thyroid levels, which triggers the release of TSH, us wanting to release more thyroid hormones. And so because of this constant, we have low levels of thyroid hormone anyway. Well, that's going to trigger the anterior pituitary gland to release more TSH. TSH will go to the thyroid gland and say, hey, I need you to make more thyroid hormone. But the thyroid hormone, but the thyroid gland is like, well, I can't make enough thyroid hormone, but I'm constantly being triggered to make more thyroid hormone. So this will cause the thyroid gland to enlarge because it can't fulfill the demand of what the TSH hormone is trying to get it to do. Thyroid hormone is critical for normal development of our brain and the growth of our brain as a child. So if you have an underactive thyroid gland, it's going to usually cause poor development of the thyroid gland. And if you have pituitary problems, pituitary problems or maternal medications may sometimes really affect the baby's ability to make thyroid hormone. It also can be asymptomatic or present with a weak cry, poor feeding, constipation, or prolonged jaundice. And of course, if there is some type of thyroid hormone deficiency, it is really crucial in using some type of therapy to offset the effects of the underactive production of thyroid hormone so that a child could grow and develop properly. But more so, like I said, for the proper development of the child's brain so that the brain can function and control the rest of the body properly. So here we see a woman that has an enlarged thyroid or a goiter by not having sufficient nutrients within her body. If you have hypersecretion of the thyroid hormone, this is going to develop into Graves, which is an autoimmune disorder where the body makes abnormal antibodies that are directed against the thyroid follicular cells. So the antibodies will mimic TSH, which will stimulate the thyroid gland to make thyroid hormone. And the symptoms will include us having an elevated rate of metabolism, sweating, rapid and irregular heartbeats, nervousness and anxiety, and then weight loss despite eating adequate amounts of food. So having an overactive production of thyroid gland can have just as negative effects on the body as having an underactive thyroid hormone levels. They're just obviously going to be on the opposite ends of the spectrum. If you do have Graves, it can be treated. Treatments can involve removing your thyroid or having some radioactive iodine to destroy the active thyroid cells. So there are treatments available for having an overactive thyroid gland that's producing too much thyroid hormone, but it's not 100% of a guarantee that these treatments will be able to cure you from that disorder. And so here we have a female, it could be a male, but I think it's a female if I remember correctly, whose eyes are bulging because of her having Graves. Like I said before, calcitonin is going to be produced by the parafollicular cells or the C cells that we find in the thyroid gland, and it's going to be produced and released in response to high calcium levels. So when calcitonin is released from the thyroid gland, it's going to cause our blood to decrease blood calcium levels and bring them back to normal. The antagonistic of the parathyroid hormone is calcitonin, because the parathyroid hormone is going to increase blood calcium levels, whereas calcitonin is going to decrease blood calcium levels. So there's no known physiological role in humans at normal levels, but at a higher than normal level of, or a higher than normal dose of this particular hormone, it's going to inhibit osteoclast activity. So remember, our osteoclasts are a particular type of bone cell that breaks down bone matrix to release calcium and phosphorus within our blood. So calcitonin will inhibit osteoclast activity to prevent the excessive release of calcium, and then it will stimulate calcium uptake and incorporation into the bone matrix. So that's how we're able to remove calcium, excessive calcium from our blood. And like I said, we saw this slide before. These are the parafollicular cells here that are going to release calcitonin. into the body. So if we take the thyroid hormone and we look on the posterior side, we'll see 4 parathyroid glands. And these parathyroid glands are going to release the hormone, the parathyroid hormone, or PTH. Parathyroid hormone is most important in controlling calcium balance. And so when we have low levels of blood calcium levels, the parathyroid hormone will be triggered to be released to increase blood calcium levels. And the target organs of the parathyroid gland or the parathyroid hormone will be the skeletal, kidneys, and the intestines. So here we have a diagram showing us, here's my mouse, here's our pharynx, and then here is the posterior side of the thyroid gland. And so these 4 nodules that we see here are going to be our 4 parathyroid glands. So parathyroid gland is going to function to stimulate osteoclasts. So now we want to stimulate those osteoclasts to break down bone matrix to release calcium so that we can increase those blood calcium levels. Also, the parathyroid hormone is going to enhance reabsorption of calcium and secretion of phosphate from the kidneys. So instead of eliminating excessive calcium and phosphate at the kidneys, we're going to reabsorb them to keep calcium within our blood. And it's going to promote activation of vitamin D by the kidneys, which will lead to the increased absorption of calcium through the intestines. So here we have a diagram showing us the effects of the parathyroid hormone on bone, the kidneys, and the intestines. I'm going to skip over these homeostatic imbalances because I'm trying to make my PowerPoints not so long, or my PowerPoint lectures not so long. Definitely make sure that you do read over these in your own study time, because I might throw in a couple of questions here and there of, the effects of over-secretion or under-secretion of these hormones. But I want to get through these without having to always listen to an hour long of a lecture. So I'm just going to skip over these so we can go to the next gland. Okay, the adrenal gland. Like I said, remember that the adrenal glands are found atop our kidneys, and there are 2 divisions of the adrenal glands. We have the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. The adrenal cortex is going to be the portion of the adrenal gland that is going to govern the secretion of our corticosteroids. And this area of the gland is going to produce over 24 different hormones that we collectively call our corticosteroids. The steroid hormones are not stored in cells, and the rate of release depends on the synthesis of these hormones. There are 3 layers of cortical cells that produce different corticosteroids. So we have the zona glomerulosa, which is going to release the mineral corticosteroids. Then we have the second layer that releases our glucocorticosteroids, or corticoids, and then our third layer is going to release our gonatocorticoids. For each one of these layers, I'm not going to ask you specifically from this particular section what hormones are going to be released from them, but I do want you to know these 3 layers and then the category of corticosteroids that are released from them. Okay, so there are a couple of hormones that I do want to hone in on, and so I'll talk about these and then skip over the other ones that I'm not going to test you on. Aldosterone. So aldosterone is a hormone that is the most potent mineral corticoid that I do want you to remember. Reason being is that it's going to stimulate sodium reabsorption from our kidneys, which will result in increase of our blood volume and blood pressure. So when our blood pressure drops, or if our blood volume tends to drop, aldosterone will be released from this portion of our adrenal cortex to increase blood volume and blood pressure. It does so by helping to eliminate potassium at the kidney level, and it's also going to have other effects on the body. So aldosterone effects are short-lived, so they're not going to be effects that are going to be long-term, but they are good at increasing blood pressure and blood volume immediately and when it needs to be done. So what happens is we stimulate the synthesis and the activation of our sodium, potassium, ATPase transport pump. And you should remember this from Bio 168 when we were talking about the generation of an action potential in the nervous system. So this is the exchange pump that's going to filter sodium outside of the cell and potassium back into the cell. So factors that will regulate aldosterone secretion are going to be the formation of renin, angiotensin, and an aldosterone mechanism, the plasma membrane or the plasma concentration of potassium, ACTH, or the atrial natriuretic peptides, which is a type of hormone that's going to be excreted from the heart. So if we look at the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone mechanism, this is, I would comfortably say this is probably the most common pathway of aldosterone release and effects on the body. So what happens is we have decreased blood pressure, which is going to stimulate special cells of the kidneys. These special cells of the kidneys will make an enzyme called renin. And renin, will then cleave off part of the plasma protein called angiotensinogen that will trigger an enzyme cascade, resulting in the conversion to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a potent stimulator of aldosterone release. So what happens is we have decreased blood pressure. That decreased blood pressure will trigger the kidneys to make renin, and then renin, through an enzymatic process, will cause the formation of angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will then target the adrenal cortex to make aldosterone. So that's that effect. If you have plasma concentration of potassium, so if there's increased potassium, that will directly influence the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, and increased potassium will directly stimulate aldosterone release, which will, and low levels of potassium will inhibit it. ACTH can cause small increases of aldosterone during periods of increased stress. And then the atrial natriuretic peptides, they are secreted by the heart in response to high blood pressure. So if you are experiencing low blood pressure, then AMP can be released by the heart. I'm sorry, if you're experiencing high blood pressure, then AMP can be secreted by the heart. That will block renin and aldosterone secretion to decrease blood pressure. Because remember, aldosterone is going to increase blood pressure. So if there's high blood pressure in the heart, high blood pressure in the body, the heart will secrete AMP, and that will actually inhibit renin and aldosterone effects so that we can help to decrease blood pressure. Okay, moving on to, like I said, this is another one that I'm going to skip, but I do want you to look over this and understand it. With glucocorticoids, these sets of hormones and the adrenal cortex are going to influence the metabolism of most cells and helps us to resist stressors. And it does so by keeping blood glucose levels relatively constant, so helping to make sure that we don't have excessive amounts within our blood. It helps to maintain blood pressure by increasing action of vasoconstrictors, so helping to constrict blood vessels so that we can help to increase blood pressure if needed, or dilate blood vessels so that we can lower blood pressure when needed. And then glucocorticoid hormones will include cortisol, which is the only glucocorticoid in significant amounts in humans. And then we have cortisone and corticosterone. So when we want to regulate the secretion of cortisol, this is going to be governed by ACTH. So ACTH is released, and then it's going to target the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Cortisol secretion cycles are governed by patterns of eating and activity. So when we are under acute stress, like an infection, a physical or an emotional trauma, this will interrupt the cortisol rhythm, and then the central nervous system can override cortisol inhibition of ACTH and CRH by leading to more cortisol secretion. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that if I'm faced with the lion and I'm like, I gotta fight or flight, the CNS is gonna override the need of wanting to maintain a state of balance so that we can act accordingly in a situation of high stress. Okay, so cortisol causes an increase in blood levels of glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. And like I said, go back to that example that I was telling you about, that when you're under high stress, your body is going to retain these fatty acid reserves so that we can be sustained during these high stress environments. So cortisol is going to cause an increase in blood levels of glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. Prime metabolic effects is gluconeogenesis, which is going to be the formation of glucose from fats and proteins. So it's going to encourage cells to use fatty acids for fuel, so glucose is saved for the brain so that we can continue functioning under these high stress environments. Other functions of cortisol is going to enhance vasoconstriction. So this is going to cause a rise in blood pressure to quickly distribute nutrients to cells when needed. Excessive levels of this, definitely read this in your own time. But like I said, I'm going to try to go through these a little faster so that we can keep going. And then with the gonadocorticoids, I'm not going to really test you on this section, so I'm going to skip over it, but it does have some pretty interesting information in it that I think is just interesting, but for time purposes, I'm going to skip over it. Okay, the adrenal medulla, this is going to be the inner portion of the adrenal gland. It's going to synthesize epinephrine and norepinephrine, our adrenaline rush hormones. So the effects of these hormones are going to be vasoconstriction to increase blood pressure, increase heart rate, increase blood glucose levels, and also blood is going to be diverted to the brain, heart, and skeletal muscles so that we can act in a time of fight or flight, at times of high stress. Both hormones have basically the same effects, but epinephrine is more of a stimulator of metabolic activity. So for instance, epinephrine is going to be the hormone that's going to cause our bronchioles to dilate so that we can take in more air. It's going to also have more blood flow to our skeletal muscles and heart so that we can perform those actions that are needed during these high stress moments. Norepinephrine has more of an influence on the peripheral vasoconstriction and blood pressure. So although both of them work together to assist us in times of high stress, they target different parts of the body. And responses to stressors are brief, unlike the adrenal cortical hormones. The adrenal cortical hormones are going to allow us to deal with high stress moments over a long period of time. So think of someone who maybe just lives a very high stressful life. Their body's going to be able to maintain itself as best as it can in those high stress moments due to hormones released from the adrenal cortex, versus when we are having an adrenaline rush. An adrenaline rush is usually going to be for a short amount of time, and that's going to be governed by the hormones released from the adrenal medulla. Okay. All right, the pineal gland, we're almost done. The pineal gland is going to be a small gland hanging from the roof of the third ventricle that we have within our brain. Pinealocytes are going to be the cells that we find within this gland that are going to release the hormone melatonin. And melatonin is going to be derived from serotonin. So melatonin, most of us have heard of this. It's going to affect the timing of sexual maturation and puberty. It's going to help to set our circadian rhythm of day and night cycles. It's going to allow us to process those rhythmic variations of normal bodily functions such as body temperature, sleep, appetite, and so on. And it's also going to produce an antioxidant and detoxification molecules within our cells. So here we have a diagram showing us an overview of different parts of our brain, and the pineal gland is right there. Okay, so we're going to we're going to go into the latter part of this chapter that's going to talk about other endocrine organs. So these are organs that do not primarily have an endocrine function, but because they do release hormones, they are going to be considered an endocrine organ as well. So the pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine glands. The endocrine cells, or I should say cells, not glands, these cells are going to produce two types of hormones. Insulin, which most of us have heard of this, they're going to be produced by beta cells within the pancreas that are going to decrease blood glucose levels. Glucagon is going to be secreted by alpha cells in the pancreas that are going to increase blood glucose levels. And I'm just kind of summarizing the effects of the hormones and what it does. Definitely go back into these sections and make sure that you understand how these hormones are generated and how they affect the body. Okay, and once again, definitely go over the homeostatic imbalances of these hormones within the body. Okay. Moving on to the gonads. So the gonads and the placenta. The gonads produce same steroid sex hormones as those of the adrenal cortex, just in lesser amounts. So if you are a female, your ovaries are going to produce estrogens and progesterone. Estrogen is going to be is going to be helpful in maturing the reproductive organs. They're also going to be helpful in establishing those secondary sexual characteristics. So as a female, we look feminine because estrogen is going to direct that deposition into the body that makes us look feminine. And then with progesterone, this is going to cause breast development and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa, especially in the time of the ovarian and uterine cycles. In the testes, if you're a male, your testes are going to produce testosterone, and this is going to initiate the maturation of male reproductive organs. Testosterone is going to cause the appearance of secondary sexual male characteristics. So testosterone is also going to drive fat deposition in males to where a man looks masculine. Testosterone is necessary for normal sperm production, so that's why if a male has low testosterone levels, it's going to directly affect a man's ability to produce adequate amounts of sperm. And testosterone will maintain reproductive organs in a functional state. The placenta is going to secrete estrogens, progesterone, and another hormone called the human chorionic gonadotrophin, or HCG. This is the hormone that is going to only be released when a woman is pregnant. And of course, it's released by the placenta. And this is the hormone that our pregnancy tests are able to pick up when a woman is pregnant. So that's why, in a lot of sense, if a woman takes or uses a pregnancy test, it is more common to have a false negative versus having a false positive. Because if the hormone is pregnant, the HCG hormone is there, it's going to read positive. Okay, adipose tissue. Adipose tissue or fat tissue is going to also produce hormones. So we have leptin. This is the hormone that's going to allow us to have appetite control. So when leptin is released, it's going to allow us to feel a sensation of being full and satisfied from what we're eating. Resistin is going to be an insulin antagonist. So resistin is going to cause excessive or more glucose to be in our blood. And adiponectin is going to enhance the sensitivity to insulin. So it's going to allow for our bodies to be more sensitive to insulin when it's released so that we can take up excessive glucose. From the gastrointestinal tract, we have enteroendocrine cells that are going to secrete hormones. So we've got these cells, endocrine cells, that we find along the gastrointestinal tract that are going to release different types of hormones. So gastrin is going to stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid from the stomach. Ghrelin, is going to be a hormone that's going to be released from the stomach to stimulate food intake. So it's going to be a hormone that's going to trigger us to take in food, make us hungry. Secretin is going to stimulate the liver and the pancreas. Cholecystokinin is going to activate the pancreas, the gallbladder, and our hepatopancreatic sphincter. So CCK is going to more specifically cause the gallbladder to secrete bile into the intestine so that we're able to break down lipid-based food products. And then incretins are going to enhance insulin release and inhibit glucagon. So if we need to have more uptake of glucose so that we can get rid of excessive glucose in our blood, it's going to enhance the response of insulin within our bodies and then inhibit glucagon, which would cause more glucose to be put into our blood. The heart, we already talked about AMP. That's going to decrease blood sodium level concentration so that we can increase blood pressure and blood volume. And then our kidneys are going to produce erythropoietin. So this is a hormone that's going to signal the production of red blood cells. And renin is going to initiate the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. The skeleton is going to involve osteoblasts and bone secretion of osteocalcin. So osteocalcin is going to be a hormone that will prod the pancreas to secrete more insulin. It's also going to restrict fat storage and improve glucose handling to overall reduce body fat. It's going to be activated by insulin, and low levels of osteocalcin are present in type 2 diabetes. So perhaps increasing levels may be a new treatment. So we might be able to use osteocalcin as a means to treat diabetes type 2 because it's a means of taking excessive glucose from blood and depositing it into our tissues and being used for energy. Our skin produces hormones as well. So cholecalciferol is going to be the precursor for vitamin D. So if you remember back to Bio 168 when we were talking about our skin is able to convert sunlight into vitamin D. So in the process of converting sunlight into vitamin D, we take those sunlight rays and convert it into our skin, converts those sunlight rays into cholecalciferol, which will then be converted into vitamin D by the rest of the body. Calcitriol is an active form of vitamin D that will help to absorb calcium from the intestines. So when the parathyroid gland releases the parathyroid hormone, one of the ways that we can increase calcium is by absorbing calcium from our intestines. Well, what happens is the parathyroid gland, the parathyroid hormone will target the intestines, like we mentioned before, and cause the intestines to make calcitriol. And then calcitriol, which is an active form of vitamin D, will help to absorb more calcium from our intestines so that we can increase blood calcium levels. Our skin also modulates immunity, decreases inflammation, and may act as an anti-cancer agent. I'm sorry, that's for calcitriol, not our skin. The thymus is large in infants and it decreases over time as we age, and it begins to shrink as we age. So the thymus is going to produce 3 different types of hormones, and the one that most people talk about are thymosins that may be involved in normal development of T lymphocytes in our immune systems. Excuse me. Thymosins are classified as hormones, but they act as paracrines, meaning that they're made by the thymus, but they're going to have effects on other cells. So thymosins are known to produce T lymphocytes, which are a type of immune cell that we'll talk about in chapter 21, 22. That's going to aid in immunity. Okay, the developmental aspects of the endocrine system. So the hormone-producing glands arise from 3 germ layers from when we are forming in our mother's wombs. The effects of environmental pollutants. So if we're exposed to pesticides, industrial chemicals, things like that, they can disrupt hormone function as we're developing. So sex hormones, thyroid hormones, and all of those are going to be very vulnerable to effects of pollutants and to what we're exposing ourselves to. And interference with glucocorticoids may help to explain high cancer rates in certain areas, especially those areas that are exposed to a lot of excessive chemicals. Endocrine function throughout life. So most endocrine organs will operate well until we're old. The endocrine system is really the only organ system that really doesn't change too much as we age. Of course, as females, we experience more changes than males do because we go through a phase of menopause due to a severe reduction of estrogen when we reach a certain age. But overall, as an entire system, the endocrine system really doesn't age. Or I'm sorry, it really doesn't change as we age. Of course, there's declining levels of certain hormones throughout the body, but as a whole, as an overall system, the declines are not as severe as other systems. So for instance, growth hormone levels are declining, that will decline with age. And so that accounts for our muscle breakdown as we age. Thyroid hormones are going to decline as we age. So that's going to really, that's going to contribute to lower metabolism. The parathyroid hormone levels will remain fairly constant with age, but lack of estrogen in older women is going to make us more vulnerable to having less calcium within our bodies, which is why women are more susceptible to developing osteoporosis than males are. Glucose tolerance will deteriorate with age, meaning that as we age, we're not able to handle excessive amounts of glucose within our blood. Ovaries will undergo a significant change, obviously, like I said it before, because we are going to produce much less estrogen, which is going to lead to females typically having an estrogen deficiency as we age. So that's why a lot of times, especially when women hit menopause, it's essential for women to go under some type of estrogen therapy treatment so that the deficiency of estrogen doesn't allow for other issues to occur within the body, since estrogen is a main governing hormone that regulates a lot of organ systems within our bodies. Testosterone levels do diminish with age, but the effect is not usually seen until very old age. So that's why if a man is pretty healthy and he's got viability, a man can continue producing children in his 70s and potentially his 80s. It's not until men really get extremely into an older age where they're not able to, or to where they really see, some effects of decreased testosterone. So that's it for chapter 16. Like I said before, I'm going to really try to make these video lectures not so long, but there are some chapters that are longer, and I want to make sure that I can explain things to you to the best of my ability. So I hope that you find this helpful, and any feedback that you have for any of these videos, please let me know, because once again, I want to make sure that these are beneficial to you all and that they're helpful in helping you study and prepare for the material. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I will see you in the next video.